Hello, everybody. It's John Hope Bryant, founder, chairman, and chief executive officer of Operation Hope, America's first nonprofit financial services network for the poor, the struggling class, the teetering class, folks with too much month at the end of their money. We're the private banker to the working poor, the struggling class in this country and increasingly around the world. I'm the founder. But as much as it's celebrated here and around the world today, Operation Hope started in the midst of a real crisis. Hello, Jennifer and Jamie and other people signing on. Hassan, good afternoon. I'm going to respond to some comments and questions. Hello, Yolanda, good evening. Delina, I'm going to respond to some of the questions and comments, and we'll be interactive in this conversation. I'm not going to give you a speech, but I am going to give you a bit of a testimony. But just give me a moment, if you will, to just frame out what is a very emotional moment for me. This vision of Operation Hope started in the midst of a tragedy. I want to give some respect to Laura King and her dad, Rodney King. Laura came to volunteer with me at Operation Hope, looking to find some healing after her dad found himself at the end of a police beating in 1992. 2 years later, she became a CPA, worked at a CPA firm, and volunteered as a Hope Corps volunteer for me at Operation Hope. So I want to give her a lot of respect. I want to thank Najee Ali and Reverend Dr. Cecil Chip Murray of First AME Church and Mark Whitlock, and all the heroes and sheroes, Reverend Bishop Blake of West Angeles Church of God in Christ, Tom Bradley, the first black mayor of a major city in the whole country, was really an international leader who provided incredible leadership during the riots and doesn't get the credit he deserves. I was 26 years old when the Rodney King riots happened. And I'm going to admit something I've never admitted before. I started Operation Hope out of guilt. So it wasn't some grand plan. It wasn't some sense of some supposed greatness. No, just the opposite in many ways. It was my insecurities, my fears, my shame for not stepping up in my own community. I didn't do anything wrong. I just walked by the problem for far too long. And when I was coming up at that time, I was doing well. I was a private banker. I bought and sold a company, and I was young, but money wasn't enough. And I wanted to figure out how I could have a bigger impact in my own world and in my life. And I didn't know what that was, but I asked God for some deeper meaning. I didn't know that Operation Hope was it. So I was just a guy making money. I was just a guy doing my thing. And when the Rodney King beating happened, I just figured that that was a non-incident. I figured that, they caught it on videotape. Those officers are going to go to prison. This is America, and they're going to go to prison. And when they got off, I felt like a fraud. I felt like because I had been successful, anybody could. And when those officers got off from that beating, which was caught on videotape, I remember some saying that sometimes justice is just us, and history is his story. And we had to make our own way out of no way without getting angry, without being upset. And I realized that jury trial happened in Simi Valley, which is 80% law enforcement populated. So of course they were going to be for their own. Of course where that trial was, the officers were going to get off. But I didn't realize that. I was sitting in my office building, the office building I had leased for my company at that time, and doing my thing and thinking that the world was fine. And then I remember the city just lit up. And I remember looking out the south from the Westwood Gateway complex where my offices were, glass ceiling windows, and I remember seeing the whole city come alive with fire. My city was on fire. And I shut down my office and I went to First AME Church, Reverend Murray, and I asked Reverend Murray, my play dad, what can I do to help? But I was really in the way. You had pastors and preachers and priests and politicians and Reverend Jesse Jackson and the governor and all these folks had purposes. I had no purpose. And I finally was able to sit in the meetings and watch these players behind closed doors agree to rebuild their community, liberals and Republicans, blacks and whites, rich and poor, conservative and liberal. But when the cameras came on, they went outside to face the cameras. They began to square off against each other because now they had an audience. And I realized that all of them actually were really politicians, except Reverend Murray. He was just trying to put his community back together. And he looked at me after the press conference was over, and he said, "John, take your business skills and help put our community back together. Take your business skills and make them work for our community. What we need are jobs." And so I left the church, 26 years old, went back to my office and organized a banker's bus tour, because I believe you don't lend where you've never been. And I thought that people were watching our neighborhoods burn like it was Beirut burning. And that's the first time I ran into radical indifference. It wasn't love or hate. It was just like, hey, not my problem. And if y'all want to tear up your community, that's your thing. That's when I began to realize that when you riot in your own community because of an injustice, you're putting an injustice on top of an injustice. Again, I'm going to deal with some of the questions. I don't think I'm giving you this speech. I'm just going to lay out the framework of what happened here, and then I'll deal with some of the questions that you have here in a moment. Hey, Amanda Jefferson, I see you there signing on, and Richard Randon and others. And so I started Operation Hope out of my own guilt, my own sense of I needed to do something. The same sense of you need to do something. I'm trying to inspire you. Hey, Chad Scott, I'm trying to inspire you in your own lives, in your own blocks, to seize the opportunity to take your own life back, take your community back, and to make a change in your own lives. And sometimes rainbows only follow storms. You know, you cannot have a rainbow without a storm first. And what would have happened, hey, Brian Hope, what would have happened if I had not stepped up and took responsibility for my own shortcomings, realizing that because I had a mom and dad who loved me and that I was successful, that didn't mean that everybody else was successful, didn't mean that everybody else had a level playing field. And so I did a banker's bus tour, put a bunch of bankers, but I also had to acknowledge that these bankers weren't racist necessarily. They weren't part of the problem. They weren't beating Rodney King, so just because they were white didn't mean they were evil. So you had police officers who beat Rodney King and they needed to go under the jail. You had these other bankers who had nothing to do with this, and but they wanted to understand the issue, what they could do to help. I had made them money. Hey, Clayton Smith. I had made them money in business, and so I was going to show them how they could make some money and rebuild their community and play a role in revitalization in our communities. But somebody had to be the gateway. So I called the SWAT team. I called the chief of police back then, Bernard Parks, and told him I was going to take a bunch of 18 bankers through the inner city, white bankers. And he said, hold on, let me get you a SWAT team. Well, actually, he said an escort. And he sent over 3 plainclothes cars with shotguns out the window, motorcycle cops in the front. It was just one 18-seat bus that we had. But he was wanting to make sure there was nothing going to happen to these bankers going through the hood. This was May 4th or May 5th of 19, so like 4 or 5 days after the Rodney King riots. And so we took a tour out through the neighborhood. Of course, nothing happened to them. But these bankers realized the residential streets, when you were on the commercial thoroughfares, they were burned down because guess what? We didn't own those properties. We didn't own those properties. But when you turned left or right, you saw Ozzie and Harrietville. You saw really beautiful, well-maintained homes in our neighborhood because it was home ownership, right? And it wasn't black home ownership or Latino home ownership or white home ownership. It was just home ownership, and that's what happens when you're an owner. And I said, that's what we need more of in these neighborhoods, and that's what the opportunity you have to do well and do good. And so we stopped at a pharmacy, Handler's Pharmacy at Western, I think it was 43rd Street, and it had gotten burned down because it was connected to a bearing wall to a Korean grocer, and there was an anti-Korean sentiment during the riots because what happened was these Asian merchants had moved into South Central LA. It was the only place they could take $40,000 from their home country of South Korea and start a business. It was the only place they could afford to do that, and they'd live upstairs on top of the business, and then they would work downstairs, and the kids would work for them. So they didn't hire the neighborhood. They weren't trying not to hire black kids or brown kids. They just could only afford free labor, which was their own children and their own mother and wife and whatever. So they'd have their own family working there. They didn't speak the language. Their culture was not to touch you, or look you in the eye. So now they're giving you your change, and they're not looking you in the eye, and they're not touching you. So they're putting the money on the counter, not touching your hand, and not looking you in the eye, so that people in our neighborhoods assumed, hold on a minute, they assumed that was racism. They assumed that, oh, you come into our community and taking from our community. Hold on a minute, you guys. You're taking from our community, but you are not giving me the respect that I deserve in this neighborhood. You won't hire me. You won't look at me. You won't talk to me. You won't respect me. Tell you what, I got something for you. So when the riots happened, the 3,000 structures were damaged. But by the way, not one was a home, because you don't burn that which you own. Not one was a home, and the only structure that was burned, owned by a black man, was the structure of the pharmacy that was connected to the commercial building owned by the Korean, because of that anti-Korean sentiment. It was not wrong for us to burn the Korean grocers. It was wrong for us to take it out on people who had nothing to do with that tragedy. But when depressed people act out, they don't do it rationally. And so I understood the pain and decided not to blame anybody. I understood my own pain and decided to do something about it. And I decided not to get angry, but to get even. I didn't want to hit you with a brick. I want to hit you with my American Express black card and knock you out. I wanted to bring revitalization in my community. I wanted to unpack poverty and repack it with power and prosperity in mind. I wanted my people to get the memo, even though I didn't know in 1992 what the heck the memo was. I just knew that my people needed solutions, they needed action, they needed prosperity, and they needed a job, and they needed an opportunity. Otherwise, the cycle was going to continue, because the riots of 1992 followed the riots of 1968 with the riots, when Dr. King and Andrew Young, my mentor, came to Riots with yet another riot. And we've seen, of course, riots in Baltimore and Ferguson. This is a never-ending horror story with no positive story on the end. And then what happens is the tragedy of injustice, it gets mortified and compounded with the tragedy of rioting, which then gets compounded with the fact that we rioted and burned down people who were given the few jobs in our neighborhood. And as a result, now you've got poverty. And so I wanted to solve this. And we went to the Handler's Pharmacy, and these bankers met this black, dignified man, Gil Matthews, who was running a profitable business, and none of them was going to fund them themselves. They were too scared to do that. Brentwood Thrift and Loan, Topa Thrift and Loan, we actually used to call them Topa Theft and Lien because their interest rates were so high. Imperial Thrift and Loan, these were state chartered industrial banks. No big bank would touch me back then. They all put up a little bit of money to raise a couple $100,000 to rebuild Handler's Pharmacy. I did it on the back of a brown paper bag. We wrote the commitments on the back of a brown paper bag to rebuild his pharmacy. He only used $100,000. He repaid it early. And those bankers got a lesson in black dignity. They got a lesson. There was no credit scores back then. But they got a lesson in black uplift and black responsibility. And here's a black man who ran a profitable business, had his business burned down, wasn't angry. Gil Matthew rebuilt that business, repaid his loan early, and was employing people back in our neighborhoods again. That was really the start of Operation Hope. Now, my mission was to eradicate poverty and change the world. This was the original logo, by the way. That's why I put this shirt on. So you see the logo today, it's an arrow, right? And a friend of mine borrowed the arrow for their political campaign, but I'm not going to talk about that. But this is the original logo for Operation Hope, and yes, I can still wear it today. I was 26 years old, had a vision to eradicate poverty and change the world. And hey, Jib Bryant, King Hudson. But people laughed at me, and they said that I was nothing, and that I was a dreamer, and that I was a kid, and I wasn't a political operative, and they sort of dismissed me. And thank God they dismissed me. Thank God they underestimated me, because nobody paid me attention until it was too late. And I just really got to work. So first, people will ignore you. Then they will criticize you. Then they will copy you. Then you win. I don't want to make this about me today, but this is a lesson in leadership. Hey, Teresa Kay. Hey, Richard Rondon. I'm going to repeat that. Please write this down as you are striving and trying to succeed in your life. And I don't want anybody to think, well, John, is this success and whatever. No. I'm telling you about a 26-year-old kid who everybody had wrote off. I had a high school degree, which Chris Rock calls a good enough diploma. I was not a political operative. I was no power broker. I was a young entrepreneur, had failed more than he succeeded. I had been homeless in 6 months of my life when I was 18 years old. I was not part of the political elite. I was a hustler with a good heart, good spirit, and I was honest, but I was not a player in this world. I didn't want to be a politician, and nobody took me seriously, and the Congressional Black Caucus and others just sort of laughed at me and kept it moving. Now, so Carla Boyd said, that's great, I support. However, so many black landlords become slumlords. I refuse to put any tenant in a property I wouldn't live in. You're absolutely right, Carla. But by the way, I found that most of the housing in South Central LA back then was actually very dignified. And certainly the housing I'm talking about now is homeownership. But you could tell, by the way, irrespective of who the landlord was, you could tell the properties that was rented versus owned because the ones that were rented had grass up to your eyeballs. And if you're renting that property, if I'm renting a property, I'm gonna cut the grass. I'm gonna treat it like I'm an owner. I did another video said the folks who rent cars don't wash them. No one washes rental cars. You have to have an ownership mentality. And so you could always tell who owned the home. And my mother used to say, "Get off my porch with that mess" to the kids in the neighborhood, and she understand mine because she owned that house. So yeah, slumlords of any sort, of any race, are bad. You should not support them. But again, let's not focus so much on our problems. Let's not focus so much on the injustice. There's injustice everywhere because then that robs you of your energy to stay focused on your prosperity. We get so focused on our pain, so focused on our problems, so focused on how people gaming us, so focused on people discriminating against us that we exhaust ourselves, and there's literally no energy left to go after the prosperity in your life. And one thing I figured out in the Rodney King riots is that black folks in particular have been struggling for so long, for good reason, by the way. We've been just jammed up in this country, built the country for free with slavery, the whole thing, never treated with respect and dignity, really, never treated with a level playing field, really. So I get that, but now we're experts at surviving, not experts at thriving. Did you get that? We're experts at surviving, not thriving. So I want to go from victims to victors, from surviving to thriving, from working from the fields to the factory, in the Industrial Revolution, from the streets to the suites in the Civil Rights Movement. And that's really what I have dedicated my life to, and why I thought that talking to you directly and giving you the memo that I have picked up over 25 years of working Operation Hope and working with 3 million clients like you who want to take their life back, and working with reputable institutions that want to help people help themselves, and why our model is working and has been now spread as a model around the world. We won the American Banker Innovator of the Year Award last year precisely because we take the emotion out of it and replaced it with good common sense and competency, and stayed focused on our mission and not gotten distracted with emotion. And so that's why I say, first, people will ignore you, write it down. Then they will criticize you. Then they'll try to copy you, and then you win. Write that down. First, folks will ignore you. Hey, Celeste Grubbs. Then they will criticize you. Then they'll try to copy you, and then you win. So when I founded Operation Hope, now I'll stop here and take some questions. In the backdrop of the Rodney King riots, I had a city councilman who's now a county board of supervisor member, very prominent there in LA, who was on my board. And by the way, when you see me write with hope on my signature page or any of my letters, I got that from him. He used to say with hope, and I asked him could I borrow it because it was actually my moniker, and I just, best things in life are copy. So I want to give credibility to Mark Ridley Thomas. He was a city councilman. He was on my first board of directors. He wanted me to be about the 8th district, and I respect him for that. He just wanted, hey, I'm trying to rebuild the 8th district. I said, well, I'm about changing the world. I want to eradicate poverty in the world. Here's this little kid, 26 years old, with like a $61,000 budget, with no support, no credibility, no nothing. And he was doing me a favor just to serve on my board of directors. And here I am saying I'm going to change the world and eradicate poverty. And he was rightly so saying, look, man, that's all nice and good. I'm trying to rebuild the 8th district of LA. I'm out of here. So he resigned from my board of directors. And then a couple other banks, didn't fund my business, and U.S. Trust didn't fund my business. We were up for a big grant, and I remember when I walked out the door, somebody told me off the record they didn't give me the money because they thought nobody's that positive, nobody's that optimistic. He's got to be a scam artist. I was dealing with all this drama, and I had to fund Operation Hope out of my pocket for 18 months. So I had to make a payroll out of 18 months, and I had to put up the first check, the second check, the third check. Nobody believed in what I was doing. And some established leaders actually tried to destroy what we were doing. And because it became for them a game, it was competition. But you had to be committed to what God put you here to do. And I knew that this was my mission from God, to take my business skills and put them to work. And so the Bankers Bus Tour grew to 1,000 bankers and investors on these buses. We did Bankers Bus Tours in South Central LA. By the way, Google search Bankers Bus Tours while you're talking to me. You'll see the photos come up on your internet search. We did them in LA, South Central LA, Long Beach, East LA. We did them in Oakland, California. We did them in Washington, D.C. We did them in, I think I did one here in Atlanta, I think. And it was a way to get people reconnected with community, out from in front of their TVs, and reconnected with human beings, and building relationships, becoming global citizens, committing as God's children. And I mean.